It's the best time of your life, but it's more than that. It's about memories, about the friends you make, the new experiences. You're setting your life in motion and choosing a path. Today, you've made a leap towards your future, and here you'll get something you can't get anywhere else: academic excellence on the most diverse campus in the state, right here in the heart of Detroit. Only here can you aim higher. Welcome to Wayne State University. College is the best time of your life, but it's more than that. It's about memories, about the friends you make, the new experiences. You're setting your life in motion and choosing a path. Today,
put me on the spot.
Well, I made a promise to my mother that I would be one of the first sons to get a degree.
I had a son right before my senior year, and he's just my everything.
Growing up in the city of Detroit, every time you go outside, you see less fortunate people. So even though I had a bunch of times I wanted to quit, every time I went outside the city, I was just so motivated to finish.
I was really encouraged by my family, especially my mom, to go back and get my bachelor's.
My sisters, my parents.
This is my mother. I put her on the back of my mortarboard, and she passed on, and I finally decided to come back and finish what I promised my mother, and what I promised to myself was to get my degree, to be the first to get the degree in the family. And I did that, and I'm 60 years old.
My biggest inspiration to finish are my parents. Coming to America, they came with nothing. So doing this for them and to make them proud and, become something in life.
No matter what happens, nobody take that away from me, and I'm proud of that.
Inspiration is thick in moments where sorrow is dense. There's only a glass ceiling if you lack confidence. And there is no room for growth without a prosperous environment. But this rose still grew into a city with the proper nourishment.
The next station is Broadway.
Because when squeezed without fluids, all that remains is the heart and the grit, which makes the sun eventually become proof of existence. So we pump life through facades to break down facades, because these streets are full of beauty and are known to defy odds. And we know persistence is a better virtue than patience, and success only comes when chances are taken. So we continue to aim higher. I am Jeff Keene, Wayne State journalism student, and the Motor City drives me to excellence.
You've made a leap towards your future, and here you'll get something you can't get anywhere else: academic excellence on the most diverse campus in the state, right here in the heart of Detroit. Only here can you aim higher. Welcome to Wayne State University. College
Put me on the spot.
Well, I made a promise to my mother that I would be one of the first sons to get a degree.
I had a son right before my senior year, and he's just my everything.
Growing up in the city of Detroit, every time you go outside, you see less fortunate people. So even though I had a bunch of times I wanted to quit, every time I went outside the city, I was just so motivated to finish.
I was really encouraged by my family, especially my mom, to go back and get my bachelor's.
My sisters, my parents.
This is my mother. I put her on the back of my mortarboard, and she passed on. And I finally decided to come back and finish what I promised my mother, and what I promised to myself was to get my degree, to be the first to get the degree in the family. And I did that, and I'm 60 years old.
My biggest inspiration to finish are my parents. Coming to America, they came with nothing. So doing this for them and to make them proud and, become something in life.
No matter what happens, nobody take that away from me, and I'm proud of that.
It's the best time of your life, but it's more than that. It's about memories, about the friends you make, the new experiences. You're setting your life in motion and choosing a path. Today, you've made a leap towards your future, and here you'll get something you can't get anywhere else: academic excellence on the most diverse campus in the state, right here in the heart of Detroit. Only here can you aim higher. Welcome to Wayne State University.
The next station is
Inspiration is thick in moments where sorrow is dense. There's only a glass ceiling if you lack confidence. And there is no room for growth without a prosperous environment. But this rose still grew into a city with the proper nourishment.
the next station is
Because when squeezed without fluids, all that remains is the heart and the grit, which makes the sun eventually become proof of existence. So we pump life through facades to break down facades, because these streets are full of beauty and are known to defy odds. And we know persistence is a better virtue than patience, and success only comes when chances are taken. So we continue to aim higher. I am Jeff Keene, Wayne State journalism student, and the Motor City drives me to excellence.
All right, you ready? Put me on the spot.
Well, I made a promise to my mother that that I would be one of the first sons to get a degree.
I had a son right before my senior year, and he's just my everything.
Growing up in the city of Detroit, every time you go outside, you see less fortunate people. So even though I had a bunch of times I wanted to quit, every time I went outside the city, like, I was just so motivated to finish.
I was really encouraged by my family, especially my mom, to go back and get my bachelor's.
My sisters, my parents.
This is my mother. I put her on the back of my mortarboard, and she passed on. And I finally decided to come back and finish what I promised my mother, and what I promised to myself was to get my degree, to be the first to get the degree in the family. And I did that, and I'm 60 years old.
My biggest inspiration to finish are my parents. Coming to America, they came with nothing. So doing this for them and to make them proud and, become something in life.
No matter what happens, nobody take that away from me, and I'm proud of that.
Big hand tonight. As a lifelong Detroiter, I am honored to have both Scott and Nadine here tonight in our city. You know, there is a myth that these types of philosophical conversations don't really have a place in urban settings. But I'm thankful for the Dean of Students office as well as Ratio Christi and Students for Life for debunking that myth. We're going to have a great night tonight. We're going to hear from two very thoughtful individuals. And as Tim said, we're going to treat them respectfully tonight. I'll be introducing them in a moment, but let me first give you a sense of the way that the night is going to flow. First, we'll hear from Nadine and then Scott in their opening remarks. They'll each have 17 minutes, not 18, not 19, not 20, but 17 minutes for opening remarks each. And then afterwards, they'll each have 10 minutes apiece for rebuttal. Following that, we'll have a dialogue of about 15 minutes. This is an exchange of ideas. During this 15 minutes, Scott and Nadine can unpack one another's arguments a little bit deeper. They're able to ask one another questions. And then after that, it's your turn. We'll have about 35 minutes of Q&A. When we have Q&A, there'll be microphones on either side of the stage. If you line up to my right, your left, that will be questions for Scott, closest to him. If you line up to my left, your right, there'll be questions for Nadine at the mic closest to her. After the 35-minute Q&A, they'll each have 5 minutes apiece for closing remarks, and then I will wrap us up and send us home. Fair enough? With that being said, let me introduce Professor Nadine Strawson. Nadine Strawson is the John Marshall Harlan II Professor at New York Law School, and she has written, lectured, practiced extensively in the area of constitutional law, civil liberties, and international human rights. From 1991 through 2008, she was the president of the American Civil Liberties Union, and she currently serves as the ACLU's National Advisory Board. Strawson has also served on the boards of other human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch. The National Law Journal has named Strawson as one of America's 100 most influential lawyers, and several other international publications have named her one of the country's most influential women. Can we give a hand to Professor Nadine Strawson? Tonight, Professor Strawson will be representing the reproductive right side of this debate, or what has been classically known as the pro-choice side of the debate. Representing the pro-life side of the debate is Scott Klusendorf. Scott is the founder and president of Life Training Institute, established in 2004 to challenge and equip pro-life advocates to persuasively defend their views in the public square. Scott is the author of The Case for Life, Equipping Christians to Engage the Culture, released in March of 2009 by Crossway Books. He is a co-author of Stand for Life, a student's guide for making the case and saving lives, which was released December 2012 by Hickerson Publishers. Scott has also published articles on pro-life apologetics in the Christian Research Journal, Clear Thinking, and Focus on the Family Citizen. Can we give Scott a big hand tonight? I would again encourage you to please make note throughout the discussion tonight of your questions, because the Q&A will be here before you know it. So as each presenter is presenting their thoughts and ideas, please make note of your questions so that you'll be ready when we get to Q&A. At this time, our first opening remarks will be presented by Professor Nadine Strawson. Let's receive her.
I assume it's okay if I put the mic here. Whoops. Help. Help. There go my notes. Sorry about that. Okay, this is just a sound check, and it's not counting against my time. Oh, thank you. What a gentleman. Okay. Yes. Is that going to work? In the back row, can you hear? Great. Well, good evening, everybody. And I always expect my students to say good evening. Thank you. I'm really honored to participate in tonight's program, and I would like to thank everyone who has worked so hard to organize it. I want to say that the debate proposition we were asked to address is the following. Abortion, is this reproductive right a moral wrong? In the landmark case of Roe versus Wade, almost 44 years ago, the Supreme Court held that abortion is a constitutional right. Moreover, despite all of the personnel changes on the court and all of the opinions that many different justices have issued on this question since then, the court's answer remains the same today. Indeed, every single justice has agreed that women have a constitutional right to abortion, at least when pregnancy threatens their lives or health. Conversely, not a single justice has ever maintained that a fetus has any legal right to be protected from abortion. In other words, not a single justice has ever opined that a fetus is a legal person entitled to independent constitutional rights before the point of live birth. Moreover, these same basic legal holdings have also been affirmed under international human rights law by courts all over the world. Notably, Roe was authored by a Republican justice, Harry Blackmun, who had been appointed by a conservative Republican president, Richard Nixon. Also notably, the court's decision was joined by a total of 7 justices, including 5 who were Republicans, appointed by Republican presidents. And even more notably for tonight's topic, these justices were observant Christians. Indeed, many religious leaders of many faiths have not only supported this legal right, but moreover, they have done so expressly on religious and moral grounds. They maintain that abortion is a moral choice for women, and that in some circumstances, it is actually a moral duty. In particular, when carrying the pregnancy to term would threaten the woman's life or health, or when the fetus has such severe health problems that its birth would be followed only by a short life of great suffering. I'd like to quote an open letter that has been signed by 2,400 religious leaders entitled Abortion as a Moral Decision. The signers represent 40 diverse denominations, including Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists. The Christians and denominations that signed this, for example, are the American Baptist Church, Disciples of Christ, the Episcopal Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Presbyterian Church, the United Church of Christ, and the United Methodist Church. I'd like to read just the opening passage in their eloquent letter. Millions of people ground their moral commitment to the right to choose abortion in their religious beliefs. While there are strong public health and human rights arguments for supporting the right of women to safe and legal abortions, we stress the religious foundations for affirming abortion as a morally justifiable decision. Most religious denominations affirm a woman's moral right to decide when abortion is morally justified in light of her circumstances, the teachings of her denomination and the dictates of her conscience. Indeed, even denominations that officially oppose abortion also include theologians and devout believers with different views. For example, it's widely known that the Catholic Church hierarchy is now anti-abortion. What is less widely known is how contested this view has been among Catholic theologians and church members. These divergent views were summarized as follows by the organization Catholics for Choice. A more liberal position on abortion is supported by core church teachings and Catholic tenets, including the primacy of individual conscience and the role of the faithful in defining norms. The Vatican has acknowledged that it does not know when the fetus becomes a person, and it has never declared its position on abortion to be infallible. Therefore, Catholics can, in good conscience, affirm that abortion can be a moral choice. Indeed, many of us do. So let me sum up what I've covered so far. First, abortion is indisputably a constitutional right, as affirmed by many Supreme Court justices across a broad ideological spectrum. Second, abortion is also morally right for many women, given their moral and religious beliefs and their circumstances. Of course, many people, including Scott, consider abortion to be morally wrong, at least in most circumstances. But precisely because we individuals have such different views on this profoundly personal moral issue, the Supreme Court's constitutional ruling is exactly right. No law and no government official should have the power to bar any woman from making this extraordinarily important decision consistent with her own moral and religious views. In other words, government officials should not be able to impose their moral or religious views on any of us. That is exactly what the First Amendment to our Constitution protects us against by guaranteeing freedom of religion and belief. The Supreme Court well explained these key freedoms in a landmark abortion ruling in 1992 called Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Casey reaffirmed what it called Roe's core holding, namely that women have a right to abortion before the point of fetal viability, when the fetus can survive outside the woman's womb. Notably, the Casey opinion was jointly written by 3 Republican justices who had all been appointed by conservative Republican presidents, Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. As these justices declared, our individual principles of morality cannot control our judicial decisions. Our obligation is to define the liberty of all, not to mandate our own moral code. Moreover, they stressed, even if some moral views are shared by the majority of the community, the majority may not use the power of the state to enforce these views on the whole society. After all, suppose the majority of the community shared the moral view that is held by some religions that a woman has a moral duty to abort a fetus with severe health problems. Government should not be able to impose that moral view on any woman who did not share it. Now, before I say any more directly about tonight's debate proposition, I want to stress one aspect of this debate on which Scott and I strongly agree with each other, even though too many people on too many campuses disagree with both of us, and that is that this kind of debate is vitally important. On too many campuses, as well as other places, there have been efforts to shut down debates about abortion and also to shut down any anti-abortion or pro-life expression on the ground that such views are offensive or upsetting to those who disagree with them. Sadly, some of these misguided censorship efforts have succeeded. I'd like to cite just one dramatic example, which comes from the University of California at Santa Barbara. As documented on YouTube, a professor actually assaulted a 16-year-old girl who was peacefully holding a sign with an image of an aborted fetus in a designated so-called free speech zone. The professor seized the sign and physically fought the girl when she tried to get it back. The professor claimed that she had a moral right to do this because the sign triggered her. Worse yet, in a letter to the campus community, the vice chancellor castigated anti-abortion crusaders for peddling fear, hate, intolerance, and discord. And he endorsed the wrong-headed view that you have a right to be shielded from expression that you might consider offensive or disturbing. But that squarely violates what the Supreme Court has called the bedrock principle of our free speech right, which is that government may never suppress speech merely because anyone considers its message offensive or upsetting, even if the vast majority of our fellow citizens do so. Indeed, we can't have the candid debates and discussions that we need on such deeply important issues as abortion without espousing views that will inevitably offend someone else's. So again, thanks to Ratio, Christi, and everyone else on this campus who is honoring these core free speech principles, including each and every one of you audience members. The reason why I so strongly defend freedom of speech about such a contested topic as abortion is the very same reason why I so strongly defend reproductive freedom substantively. In both contexts, we individuals should have the right to make our own choices about what ideas and beliefs we accept. The government should not impose upon us its ideas and beliefs or those of our fellow citizens. So that's my basic case for abortion as a legal right, which is also morally right from the perspective of many women and many religious leaders. In my remaining time, I'm going to briefly list a few more specific points in support of those conclusions, and then if time permits, I'll expand on one or more of those points. First, the Supreme Court's rulings have reflected a Solomonic, moderate position, respecting both the pregnant woman's right to control her own body and her own life, and the government's interest in protecting the potential new life in her womb, allowing government even to outlaw abortion at the point of viability. Second, this crucial line that the court has drawn at viability is consistent with many moral and religious beliefs, including Judeo-Christian. For example, I'd like to quote Dr. Rick Lowry, a Bible scholar and Disciples of Christ minister. He wrote, "The view that underlies Roe versus Wade, that a line is crossed when the fetus becomes viable, seems most morally defensible and consistent with the biblical view." Third, the pro-choice position has fairly been described as pro-life, including by many religious leaders, both because it literally saves the lives of all the women who would die through unsafe, illegal abortions they would have anyway, even if abortion were outlawed, and also because it promotes the lives of the children and families the women already have. Fourth, doctors perform abortion because of their conscientious conviction that they have a moral duty to do so. Fifth, as the Supreme Court has recognized, the constitutional right to abortion promotes gender equality and women's rights, even beyond the universal individual rights that are also at stake, rights to bodily integrity and self-determination. In my remaining time, I'll elaborate a bit on a couple of these points, starting with the one that the pro-choice position has fairly been described as pro-life, including by diverse religious leaders. For one thing, even when abortions are completely illegal, women still have them. But illegal abortions are more likely to kill women or to destroy their future childbearing capacity. According to the World Health Organization, each year about 20 million women are still having unsafe, illegal abortions, which cause the deaths of about 70,000 women per year, and also destroying the future reproductive capacity of many more. Furthermore, choosing not to carry a pregnancy to term can well promote life in other ways. I'd like to quote the Reverend Deborah Hafner, who is director of the Religious Institute on Sexual Morality, Justice, and Healing. She wrote, "Virtually all faith traditions celebrate the blessings of generating life and assuring that life can be sustained and nurtured. It is precisely because life and parenthood are so precious that no woman should be coerced to carry a pregnancy to term. That is why many religious leaders support responsible procreation and intentional parenting." The next point I'd like to elaborate on for a moment is that doctors perform abortions because of their conscientious convictions that this is their moral duty. This key point was discussed by sociologist Carol Jaffe in her book, Doctors of Conscience. I'd like to, she talks about doctors, even when abortion was completely illegal in this country, why did they risk their medical licenses and their careers? It was because they felt a moral duty. And even though abortion providers now work within the law, they still have much to lose, facing harassment and, tragically, as we know, even murder, but they still feel compelled to do this because of their moral beliefs. I'd like to quote Lisa Harris, one such doctor who has interviewed many others. She wrote, "Abortion providers describe their work consistently in moral terms as right and good, and they say that the failure to offer abortion violates their conscience." Next, I'd like to quote the Supreme Court's point that reproductive freedom is an essential aspect of gender equality for women. Notably, this point was stressed in an opinion written by the court's first female justice, Sandra Day O'Connor. Before becoming a judge, O'Connor was a prominent Republican politician in Arizona, a very conservative state. And yet she stressed that the ability of women to participate equally in the economic and social life of the nation has been facilitated by their ability to control their reproductive lives. And if I'm reading the signs right, I have to turn to my conclusion right now because I don't want to overstay my welcome. So I would like to close with a statement by the Supreme Court, which has been repeatedly reaffirmed by justices all across the ideological spectrum, and which eloquently explains why the Constitution protects women's reproductive freedom, not only because it is consistent with our physical autonomy and well-being, but also because it is consistent with our moral autonomy, our religious and conscientious freedom. As the court declared, these matters involving the most intimate and personal choices a person may make in a lifetime, choices central to personal dignity and autonomy, are also central to constitutionally protected liberty. At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Strawson. At this time, can we welcome Scott Klusendorf, please?
Thank you, Nadine, for your opening remarks, and thank you, Ratio Christi, for an outstanding event. I'm known as an apologist. I'll define what that is. An apologist is not someone who runs around and says he's sorry all the time. That's what husbands do. An apologist is someone who makes a case for what he believes, and tonight I'm going to make a case for the pro-life view. And I want to begin by asking you to indulge me in a thought experiment. Those of you that are students, I want you to think 10 years into the future. You are married, you've met the man or woman of your dreams, and you have a 5-year-old. And one day you're at the kitchen sink washing dishes after supper, and that 5-year-old comes up behind you with your back turned and says, "Daddy or Mommy, can I kill this?" Now, some of you ladies look puzzled. You can't imagine the cute little fellow asking such a question. This ring on my finger assures you that they most assuredly can ask that question. I've been married for 30 years to the most glorious woman in all of Christendom. We have a son 26, son 24, son 20, daughter 16. I have personally heard the question, Daddy, can I kill this, more times than I can count, and almost always his hands are on his brother's throat when he's asking the question. What would be the first question out of your mouth? Obviously, it would be, what has he got? You would never in a million years say, sure, son, have at it, till you answered the predicate question, what is it? And now we have arrived at the crux of the abortion debate. I agree with everything Nadine just said. She is absolutely correct that the state should not impose its view on women who want abortions. She is absolutely correct that pro-lifers like me should not seek to impose our moral views on those who disagree. She is absolutely correct. There should be no legislation regulating the right to choose. She's absolutely correct that Roe v. Wade is good law. I agree with everything she just said. If what? If the unborn are not human. This is not a debate between those who are pro-choice and those who are anti-choice. Nadine and I are anti-choice on spousal abuse, corporations polluting our rivers, unjust wars, spousal abuse, and a whole host of issues. The question of whether abortion is right or wrong begins with the question, what kind of thing does abortion kill? And to answer that question, we do not go to religion. We do not go to philosophy. We go to a particular place known as the science of embryology, and here, in a nutshell, is the syllogism I'm going to defend this evening. Premise 1, it is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Premise 2, abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Conclusion, therefore, abortion is wrong. The science of embryology backs up the claim that the unborn are distinct, living, and whole human beings. This is not a theological view. This is a scientific view. Nor will it help to say, well, people disagree on perspectives. There's a woman's perspective on abortion, there's a man's perspective. Actually, that won't work either. And here's why. It's arguments that must be advanced. It's evidence that must be looked at. There's no more a woman's perspective on abortion than there is a man's perspective on abortion. You've got to look at the evidence. That's what carries the day. And the science of embryology, I'll summarize it for you in a sentence. From the earliest stages of development, you were a distinct, living, and whole human being. Keith L. Moore and TVN Passard, in their embryology textbook, The Developing Human, Clinically Oriented Embryology, write, the zygote is the beginning of a new human being. Human development begins at fertilization, the process during which a male gamete or sperm unites with a female gamete or oocyte to form a single cell called a zygote. This highly specialized totipotent cell marks the beginning of each of us as a unique individual. T.W. Sandler's Langman's embryology textbook says, quote, the development of a human being begins with fertilization, a process by which the sperm from the male and the oocyte from the female rise and unite to give rise to a new organism, the zygote. This is not religion. This is science that we are looking at. Now, the question then becomes, does abortion intentionally kill an innocent human being? And I'm not going to ask you to take my word for it. Dr. Warren Hearn, author of the book Abortion Practice, the medical teaching text that teaches doctors how to perform abortions, writes, quote, when it comes to abortion technology, he writes, quote, we have reached a point in this particular technology where there is no possibility of denying an act of destruction. It is before one's eyes. The sensations of dismemberment flow through the forceps like an electric current. Ronald Dworkin, the famous liberal professor, writes in his book, Life's Dominion, quote, abortion deliberately kills a developing embryo and is a choice for death. Naomi Wolf, feminist in the New Republic, writes that when we cling to rhetoric about abortion that denies that a real death happens in abortion, we dehumanize ourselves with fibs and things that aren't honest. And finally, feminist Camille Paglia writes, hence I have always frankly admitted that abortion is murder, the extermination of the powerless by the powerful. Liberals, for the most part, have shrunk from facing the ethical consequences of their embrace of abortion, which results in the annihilation of concrete individuals and not clumps of insensate tissue. In just a moment, I'm going to roll for you a very short video clip. It's 55 seconds long. The clip is not designed to beat up on people who may have had abortion. In fact, as a Christian, though I am making a scientific and philosophic case for my view tonight and am not bringing sectarian religion to my case, I will say this. As a Christian, I am committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ that says that all sinners can be forgiven of their sin if their faith is in Jesus' atoning work. And that goes for any who've had abortions, and that's why I don't wish to beat up on anybody. But I do want to get at the truth. And this clip does get to the truth. If you choose to watch, and viewing is optional, you will not see an abortion performed, but you will see the aftermath. And I want to warn you, it's disturbing to look at. You will see first, second, and third trimester post-abortion fetuses. When the clip concludes, and because there's no narration, you can simply look away. You won't hear or see anything you don't want to hear or see. When the clip concludes, I will make a philosophic case for the pro-life view before we get ready for our rebuttal statement. So without further delay, we're going to roll that clip. And again, if you wish to look away, you feel the freedom to go ahead and look away. Science tells us that the unborn are distinct, living, and whole human beings. They're not part of another human being like skin cells on the back of your hand. They are themselves distinct, whole living members of the human family. And I get that that can be difficult to understand. You think, how can something as simple as what appears to just be a ball of cells be one of us? Let me give you an example, though, that may help you. For those of you under 50, let me enlighten you about the dark ages of photography prior to the cell phone era. The way it worked for your parents when they shot pictures, they had camera, and in the camera there was this stuff called film. And you shot the film, you shot about 36 exposures, and then only after you'd shot 38 or 36 pictures, you would take the film out of the camera, drive it to the far side of the supermarket parking lot where there was a little shack known as Photomat. You would then turn in your film, wait a month and a half for half your pictures to come back overexposed. It was tough back then. But then in 1970, we had an interesting development. Kodak developed the Polaroid camera. And the Polaroid camera allowed you to shoot a picture and get it immediately. You'd shoot the picture, it would spit it out. There it was. You didn't have to wait a month and a half to get your pictures back. Pretend you're on a safari and you shoot a picture of a black jaguar jumping across a Mexican jungle trail. They're almost never photographed, but you got it. And right as you're waiting for that picture to develop, I rip the camera out of your hands, tear up the paper. Are you angry at me? You're furious. What if I said to you, what's the big deal? There's no jaguar in that picture. That's just a white paper with a brown smudge on it. You would be livid at me. And it wouldn't work for me to simply say, no big deal. You'd look at me with your eyes raging and you would say, are you kidding me? The jaguar in the picture was already there. We just couldn't see him yet because he hadn't developed. In the same way, men and women, you were already there from the one cell stage. We just couldn't see you yet because you had yet to develop. Science, though, cannot tell us how to treat the unborn. Here we need to do philosophy. I'd like you to just stare around the room at a few people. Go ahead. Just stare at a few people. Guys, if there's a cute girl here tonight, you've been dying to make eye contact, now is your God-ordained chance to do it. Don't laugh. I met my wife that way. Go ahead. Stare around the room. What makes us equal? It can't be physical ability because we don't share that equally. It can't be self-awareness because we don't share that equally. It can't be IQ. We don't share that equally. There's only one thing we share equally in this room. We all have the same human nature. And you got that human nature the moment you began to exist. Human parents produce human offspring. Now, some people might say, but okay, that embryo is different than us. You're right, he is. But is he different from us in ways that justify killing him? There are 4 essential differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, and not one of them is a good reason for saying you could be killed then, but not now. As Stephen Schwartz says, there's a difference of size, a difference of level of development, a difference of environment, meaning where we're located, and a difference of degree of dependency. Think of the acronym SLED. Those 4 differences are not good reasons for saying you could be killed then, but not now. Size, you were smaller as an embryo, but since when does body size determine value? We don't think Shaquille O'Neal is more human and valuable than us because he's 7 foot tall and a foot taller than most people in this auditorium. Level of development is not a good reason for saying you can be killed. Sure, 2-year-old girls are small. In fact, they don't even have a developed reproductive system. But no one here thinks they're less human and valuable than the 21-year-old young woman who does. In fact, this is precisely what Abraham Lincoln argued with slavery. His opponents would say that black man differs from us. He doesn't look like us. He's not as intelligent. Here was Lincoln's response, and I'll quote him almost word for word. Lincoln would say, you say man A is white, man B is dark. It is skin color then, the fair-skinned man having the right to enslave the dark-skinned man. Take care. By that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet with skin fairer than your own. You say it isn't intellect, or it isn't skin color, it's intellect. The white man you allege having superior intellect to the dark man. Take care again. By that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet with an intellect superior to yours. I think you see what Lincoln was doing here. By the force of principled reasoning, the same arguments used to discredit the black man discredited the white man. By the same token, the arguments used to disqualify the unborn disqualify a whole lot of people outside the womb. Size, level of development. What about environment, where you're located? You were in the womb, now you're out. But where you are does not determine what you are. If you journeyed an hour to get here, maybe you drove 70 miles, you didn't stop being you. If that's true, how does a journey of 7 inches down the birth canal suddenly transform you to non-human, non-valuable thing we can kill to valuable human being that we can't? Finally, degree of dependency. Sure, you depended on your mother for survival, but since when, as a matter of principle, does dependency on another human being mean that we can kill you? There are people in comas who depend exclusively on a physician and will die if they are not in his care. Does it follow the physician can kill them because that person depends totally on them for survival? Size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency. Think SLED. Those are the only 4 differences between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, and none of them are good reasons for saying you could be killed then but not now. Tonight's debate, men and women, is really not about a surgical procedure. It's about a far grander, deeper question. Who counts as one of us? In the past, we used to discriminate on the basis of skin color and gender. Now, with abortion, we discriminate on the basis of size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. We've simply swapped one form of discrimination for another. If you look around this room as you did a moment ago, there's only one solid basis for claiming human equality, and that is that each of us in this room are equally human. This is precisely what our founders wrote in the Declaration of Independence when they said all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Our right to life is not based on performance. It's not based on being viable. It's not based on having an independent existence. It's based on one thing. We are all human beings. You can dispute this, but you will cut the ground out for human equality. I think the pro-life view offers the best option for human equality. You aren't valuable because of your functions. You aren't valuable because of your athletic ability. You're not valuable because of your intellect. You're valuable because you're one of us. And the question then becomes, when did you come to be? And the answer from the science of embryology is clear and incontrovertible. You came to be at the moment of fertilization. That is the true basis for human equality. That is what will make America a true and equal civilization.
Thank you. Now that both of our debaters have given their open remarks, we'll have 10 minutes each for rebuttal, and we'll start first with Professor Strawson.
Well, I would agree with everything Scott said following his opening line, if I agreed with him that a fertilized egg is equivalent in science, morality, or law to a full-fledged human being, or, as the Constitution uses the term, a person. And quite frankly, I think it is rather insulting to the racial minorities and other full-fledged human beings, persons, to compare them not only to a fetus, but indeed even just to a fertilized egg. Now, I don't mean to be at all dismissive of the potential of life. That is something that all of us who revere life have to take very seriously. And I think one of the reasons why each time I reread Roe versus Wade, as I did yet again before this debate, I am so moved and persuaded by Justice Harry Blackmun's reasoning. And by the way, as many of you know, Blackmun was a devout Methodist. He took his beliefs very seriously. He was also a devout student of science and medicine. He had been legal counsel for the Mayo Clinic in his native Minnesota before he was appointed to the Supreme Court. And he spent the entire summer after Roe versus Wade was argued in the libraries at the Mayo Clinic, researching deeply into medicine, into embryology, into all the information that science as well as philosophy could provide before he reached the conclusion, which has been consistently reaffirmed not only by the Supreme Court on restudy, but also by briefs that are filed in every Supreme Court case on abortion, including the most recent one that the court decided this last spring, briefs by scientists, by doctors, by medical ethicists, by Nobel Prize winners, by embryologists, all saying the disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus as to when life begins. But what Blackmun said is clearly there is potential life from the beginning, and that is something to which he and the other justices gave respect. I think that is exactly right, that they give some weight in the analysis to the fact that we are talking about a potential life, but they also give weight to the fact that we are dealing with an actual, indisputable, full-fledged human being, legal person, namely a woman. I did not hear much reference to her in Scott's otherwise eloquent presentation. There was no depiction of the woman in the images that Scott showed, and I think that is a crucial missing piece here, that we are talking about a full-fledged human being and something that is only a potential human being. In terms of legal rights, the term in the Constitution is person, and the Supreme Court, as I said, with never a single dissent, including from the most ardent Catholic justices such as Scalia and Thomas, not a single one of them has ever argued that a fetus at any stage of development, much less at the early stage that Scott talks about, the mere fertilized egg, not a single one of them has ever argued that that should be recognized as a person with full-fledged legal rights. And I think for good reason, given the science here. I'll cite one bioethics in the New Embryology book by 3 authors who conclude, science does not offer a hard and fast answer to the question of when human life begins, and there is no consensus among scientists' opinions. Indeed, I thought I heard in part of Scott's remarks that he agreed with this when he said, science can't tell us how to treat the unborn. Yes, science can tell us that if time goes by, it will develop and it can ultimately become a full-fledged human being, a person. But the question of how to weigh the interests and rights of that potential person at various stages of development against the urgent needs of the pregnant woman and her family and her moral beliefs and her health and her life and her religious beliefs, that is a question for philosophy and for law. And as we've seen, different people answer that question differently. Scott also talked about the question of whether you can kill something depends on what kind of thing it is. I personally have a different answer to that. I happen to have a great reverence for all living creatures, and it's true, I happen to not even kill a fly or a bee or something that's trying to sting me. So for me, the question is not privileging humanity over other living species, but the question again is it only potential or is it an actual living being? Here, let me read to you something from another, I believe, embryologist, David Grimes, a physicist and cancer researcher at Oxford University, to talk about how big is the actual scientific difference between the potential for life that exists at the beginning stages that Scott wants to treat as a full-fledged human being all the way through. And it's addressing the question, are eggs and embryos stable individuals, a point that Scott was defending. He says embryonic existence is very precarious. Zygotes, blastocysts, and embryos have a high failure rate, which throws cold water on the claim that every fertilized egg is sacred. Scientists estimate that 55 to 65% of all conceptions are spontaneously aborted in the first few days or weeks of a pregnancy, usually without the woman ever knowing that she was pregnant. It's called fetal wastage. Another 10 to 15% of pregnancies are miscarried in the months to come. Fetal wastage occurs because early embryonic forms have a high defect rate. Most early miscarriages are caused by genetic defects in the fertilized egg. This shows that eggs and embryos do not yet qualify as human beings according to nature herself. At best, they represent tryouts for the human race and personhood. And many of the religious writings and ethical and moral writings that I read in preparing for tonight's program talk about how both in religious traditions and in everyday life, even a miscarriage is something that is deeply upsetting and a very sad, painful event, and yet distinct from a stillbirth, right? That there are rituals that we attend to somebody who is actually born and dies, including funerals and other religious rituals that are not seen as appropriate to any early stage. I have 1 minute left, and what I'd like to do is to quote just a couple of the doctors. And these are people of science and people of great dedication to humanity. Why would they perform abortion if they considered to be indistinguishable from a murder of a small human being or a dependent human being or the other examples that Scott gave? So let me just read, I think I have time for, I guess I probably at this point I have time for two. So here's one doctor who says, I continue to do abortions because the voices of gratitude and relief for my patients drown out the hatred and intolerance from the protesters outside. In the small, still hours of the night, I am at peace with myself and with God, who gave me this mission in life. And I'm going to read just one more, if I can find my dog-eared column here. There's so many of these, are so eloquent and so moving. I feel deeply morally called to be an abortion provider because in no other field of medicine are the patients more maligned, judged, and stigmatized. I am able to provide comfort and healing to women, let us not forget the women, on a spiritual and physical level. I consider it to be the single most compassionate and fulfilling procedure a physician can provide for women. Thank you very much.
At this time, Scott will have 10 minutes to give his rebuttal. Let me encourage you to begin to jot down your questions if you have not already done so. We'll have Q&A shortly.
Let's review the syllogism. The syllogism I put forward tonight was that it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being, that abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. I defended that with the science of embryology, arguing that the unborn are distinct, living, and whole human beings, and I cited embryology textbooks to make that claim, and I argued philosophically there was no essential difference between you, the embryo, and you, the adult, that would justify killing you back then. Nadine responded primarily with agnosticism, but this fails, and let me explain why. She begins her remarks with an appeal to the majority. No justice recognizes the unborn as human beings with rights. Well, justices once didn't recognize slaves with rights either. In fact, in the Supreme Court case Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court appealed to the status of where the legal law was. It said, look, we have precedent, we don't want to change it. This is settled law, and yet it was deeply immoral law. An appeal to the majority will not make her case. Now, here's the biggest problem, though. If we don't know if the unborn are human, should we be killing them? If you're driving home from tonight's debate and you see what looks like an old coat in the road, but it could be an old man who had a little bit too much to drink, are you going to run the coat over? No, you're going to err on the side of caution. Or to borrow an example from former President Ronald Wilson Reagan, if you're out hunting and you see bushes rustling in front of you and you don't know if it's that deer you've been after or your best buddy, are you going to open fire? Not unless you're Dick Cheney, right? You're going to err on the side of caution. There's no way you're going to open fire. If we don't know if the unborn are human, we shouldn't be killing them. Nadine also argued there's no consensus on when life begins. Men and women, this is utterly fallacious. How does it follow that because people disagree, there's no right answer? By the way, if disagreement means no truth, Nadine's position is falsified because I disagree with it and so do a whole lot of other people. The reality is people once disagreed on whether slaves ought to have rights. It didn't mean there wasn't a right answer. They once disagreed on whether women should have the right to vote. It didn't mean there wasn't a right answer. Hadley Arkes puts it well. The absence of consensus does not mean an absence of truth. Nadine also cited a Webster brief from 1989 from the Webster Supreme Court case of 167 experts who were allegedly testifying that we don't know when life begins. Now, what's interesting, which she didn't tell you, I've actually researched this brief, there wasn't a single embryologist in that brief. There were 11 Nobel laureates, but none of them are embryologists. In fact, I'd like to quote for you the rest of that statement from the brief. I think you'll find it shocking. Listen to what they say. There is no scientific consensus that human life begins at conception, at a given stage of fetal development, or at birth. These so-called experts say we can't even know if a born child is a human being. So that argument she cited not only disqualifies the unborn if it were valid, it would disqualify the newborn. She also cited Scott Gilbert's book, Bioethics and a New Embryology. I'm familiar with this book. It's a nice book, but it's not an embryology textbook. In fact, Scott Gilbert wrote it with 2 of his students. It's a layman's book, and it's about bioethics. Bioethics is philosophy, not science of embryology. She cited a source that cannot live up to what she hopes it will. In fact, the book, as you read through it, and it's a nice read, I disagree with it, but it's a nice read, as you begin to read it, he quickly shifts from the question, what is the unborn, to how should we value persons? In other words, he ditches science almost immediately and punts to philosophy. Nadine also cited that, she also said that we can't know if the unborn are human because there's so much disagreement. I got news for you. There's plenty of people on her side of the issue who will dispute what she just said. Ronald Dworkin called abortion the deliberate killing of a human embryo. David Boonin, author of A Defense of Abortion, writes, a human fetus, after all, is simply a human being at a very early stage in his or her development. I mean, these are not people on my side of the issue. These are people on her side. Peter Singer, the Princeton bioethicist, writes, whether a human being is a member of a given species is something that can be determined scientifically. And I appreciate this about him. Singer looks at this and says, look, I'm not a scientist, but I can read the data. I can see the evidence. We can know what the unborn is, says Peter Singer. It's not as crazy and hard to know as you might think. In fact, a journal article that appeared in California Medicine in 1970 as abortion was breaking onto our scene made a very interesting point. This journal article supports abortion, but listen to what the authors say in California Medicine in September of 1970. Since the old ethic has not yet been fully displaced, it has been necessary to separate the idea of abortion from the idea of killing, which continues to be socially abhorrent. The result has been a curious avoidance of the scientific fact, which everyone really knows, that human life begins at conception and is continuous, whether intrauterine or extrauterine, until death. The very considerable semantic gymnastics which are required to rationalize abortion as anything but the taking of a human life would be ludicrous if they were not often put forth under socially impeccable auspices. It is suggested that this schizophrenic sort of subterfuge is necessary because while the old ethic is being accepted, the old one has not yet gone away and been rejected. Here's the other problem with Nadine's argument. If we don't know if the unborn are human, Roe itself falls apart. Roe v. Wade, according to Justice Blackmun, is predicated on the status of the fetus. Blackmun said the right to an abortion hinges on the status of the fetus. That is, whether or not it's a human being. The court then said it didn't know if the unborn were human, which means it also doesn't know if a right to an abortion exists. In other words, Nadine's agnosticism gets undermined legally, not just morally, and this is deeply problematic to review. She also had some medical inaccuracies. She called the early embryo a fertilized egg. This is name-calling, not medical science. Anybody who studies embryology knows that sperm and egg die in the act of conception. They surrender their constituents into the makeup of a new being. Fertilized egg is a misnomer. You're not going to find it in credible embryology textbooks. She also said that miscarriage defeats my view. Really? How does it follow that because nature spontaneously triggers a miscarriage, that A, the embryos in question are not fully human, or B, we may intentionally kill them. Many countries, like India, have horrendous high infant mortality rates. Children die before a month old after being born. Does it follow those who die sooner are less human and valuable than those who die later? Earthquakes happen in third world countries and kill hundreds of thousands. Does that justify mass murder? There's nothing in this claim that does anything to refute the case that I made. Later this evening, in my closing, I'm going to talk about a couple of other things that Nadine did that were mistaken, some assumptions she made. She repeatedly assumed the unborn were not human. She said things like this: no law should bar a woman from making decisions. Really? Well, that depends on what we're choosing. Choose what? What if a mother wants to kill her 2-year-old in the privacy of the home? Should she be allowed to do that? The argument only works if she assumes the unborn are not human, something she did not argue for. Another thing that happened is that Nadine provided us with an insecure foundation for human rights. She cited the mystery passage. At the heart of liberty, she quoted from the Supreme Court's Casey decision, is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. In other words, human nature is not objective, it's subjective. So why can't a future Supreme Court just come along and make women up not to be creatures of rights if that happens to fit its definition of the mystery of human life? And voila, women no longer have any rights. I think my foundation for human rights is much better. We all have value. We all have dignity, not because of function, not because 9 justices somewhere either define us into existence or out of existence. Keep that in mind. The same justices who define you into existence can define you out. Rather, I rest my case on the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. We are endowed with certain rights, and no government can take them away. And we have those rights from the moment we began to exist.
At this time, we're going to ask for the podium to be removed so we can have a dialogue between Nadine and Scott for about 15 minutes. You know, in many ways, we could have reframed tonight. Instead of calling it a debate, we could have simply called it a discussion. That's what we're here to do. We're here to discuss tonight various views respectfully with one another. And so we're going to do that now. While they're discussing with one another, probing deeper into each other's perspectives, I'm encouraging you to please make note of your questions, because following this 15-minute discussion and dialogue, we will have Q&A, and again, there will be a mic set up on either side of the stage for one another. I'll allow Professor Strawson first to ask any questions she would of Scott.
Maybe I'll sit down here so I can see Scott. We were joking that this is such a long table to keep us so far
you want to put
apart,
her,
but-
switch with her?
Yeah, we can switch.
What, you will switch.
Okay. Yeah, that would be good. And is this mic working now, by the way? I turned it on. Great, thanks.
Nadine and I have a developed sense of civility, so we can be close to each other and everything will be fine.
So, Scott, my first question for you is, would you absolutely oppose abortion in every circumstance, including when it's necessary to save a woman's life, when it's necessary for her health, when she is the victim of rape or incest being the most common examples where
Sure.
many pro-lifers make exceptions?
Yeah, fair question. Let me take the first one, her life. There are medical cases known as ectopic pregnancy where the embryo implants on the inner wall of the fallopian tube. If you do not remove that embryo, as that embryo grows in that narrow tube, the danger to the mother is clear. That embryo grows, the tube bursts, the mother hemorrhages to death. You're a pro-life doctor. What are you going to do? Do you do nothing and let 2 humans die? Or do you act in such a way that you save one life even though the unintended but foreseen result is the death of the human embryo? And my answer, Nadine, is we act to save the mother. Now, here's where I need to get back to definitions. You'll notice in my syllogism, I defined abortion very carefully. The intentional killing of an innocent human being. When a doctor acts to save a mother's life, he is not intentionally killing an innocent human being. He can foresee the death of the embryo in the case of ectopic pregnancy, but he does not intend it. So I don't even call that abortion. That's a life-saving surgery that any physician who's pro-life would do, and no legislation has ever forbid that kind of surgery. You also mentioned rape, and that's the question.
And also, I mean, I'd like to hear your answer to
Sure.
that, but also, if it's not a matter of literally saving the pregnant woman's life,
Yeah,
but
health.
her health.
Sure,
to avoid
good
a
question.
serious adverse health impact, including perhaps potential infertility.
Yeah, good question. Dr. Thomas Murphy Goodwin, who runs the largest prenatal health clinic in the world at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at USC in Los Angeles, he sees 15,000 women a year who are told by their primary care physicians, if you do not abort, you will die or have incredibly serious complications to your health. He says of those 15 to 16,000 women a year, only 1 to 2 cases a year actually require ending the pregnancy to save the mother's health in the sense of grave health threat or life. Now, here's where it gets interesting. He treats women with advanced stages of breast cancer with heavy doses of chemotherapy when their primary care physician said, if you don't abort, you're going to die. And he says this, the mother and the fetus tolerate the treatment because he knows how to do it. And he said the problem is too many primary care physicians recommend termination because they don't want to get sued for wrongful birth, and they thus recommend it. Now, you did use a word I do need to define, and then I'll stop so you can follow up. I don't want to hog all your time here. But you mentioned the word health, and I think we need to be clear on what this means. The Supreme Court in Roe v. Wade said that abortions could only be restricted in the 3rd trimester by the state if it did not interfere with the woman's, quote, health, unquote. In Doe v. Bolton, the companion case, the Supreme Court went on to define health so broadly you can drive a Mack truck through it. Familiar health, social health, emotional health, and health. In fact, the World Health Organization's definition of health, which is that broad, encompassing loophole, is precisely what the court relied on in defining health. So what we end up with is not a balanced Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision. We've got a very radical one. In fact, so radical that in 1983, a U.S. Senate subcommittee said that based on Roe's definition of health, there are no meaningful restrictions to abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy.
Well, I disagree with that, and besides, the Supreme Court modified significantly that standard in the current governing law, which is Casey, which,
well, it said undue burden, but the undue burden, Nadine.
No, Scott, let me finish my sentence, please. Which allows abortion to be completely outlawed. And to the best of my knowledge, most states take advantage of that option at the point of viability. It got rid of the trimester approach altogether. But going back to the question, what do you define as health? Would there ever be a situation short of literally necessary to save a woman's life?
Yeah, I just gave you one, ectopic pregnancy. Absolutely, I would do it there.
I said,
and if there,
right. when it's not literally life-saving,
sure, yeah, and let me answer.
Would there be a definition of health?
Sure, I'll answer that. Let me make an observation, though. Even if my answer were inconsistent, it wouldn't eradicate the syllogism I put forward, that the unborn are distinct, living, whole human beings, and that killing them is unjust. So even if I answered this question in a way that seemed inconsistent with my view, it would only show I'm inconsistent. It wouldn't rule out the evidence I presented. But let me answer it. If the mother's health were in danger, no, because health has been defined so broadly.
No, but is there any health situation that, according to
I am
your
unaware
view,
of. any health situation, as Dr. Thomas Murphy Goodwin put out, that requires killing the child to save the mother. There are cases where they do need to end the pregnancy early, and they will do that.
You're, as we law professors would say, you're fighting the factual situation. Let's assume hypothetically that let's say she will not lose her life, but she will be rendered infertile. Let's use that as an example of an adverse health consequence.
Right.
Would that be a situation where you would say the pregnancy could be terminated?
In that case, the mother stands to lose one good. The child stands to lose an ultimate good. The mother loses fertility. The child loses its life. Being killed is immeasurably worse than losing your fertility.
Okay. And rape and incest?
Yeah, thank you. Here's the question. You and I both agree that a woman who has been sexually assaulted has suffered a terrible injustice. We both agree on that. My guess is we disagree on the solution. So here's the question that comes to mind. How should a civil society treat innocent human beings who remind us of a painful event? Is it okay to kill them so we can feel better? We're back to the question, what is the unborn? Does hardship justify homicide? If I have a 2-year-old in front of me and his father was a rapist, would it be okay to execute the 2-year-old for the sin of his father? I think we'd all say no. Which means if the unborn are human, like that toddler, we shouldn't kill them in the name of hardship any more than we would kill the toddler for that reason. Now, having said that, I want to make it clear that my answer may not feel good to me because I can easily sympathize with that woman that I can see right in front of me. It's easy. I can see her. I can sympathize with her. It's harder for me to sympathize with her child, but I can't trample on the rights of that child without also putting in jeopardy the very foundation that gives any of us value and a right to life, namely that we shouldn't be killed just because someone would feel better if we were dead.
Yeah, so I understand. I mean, you are being consistent in your view that from the earliest moment of conception, and I'm sorry, what is the scientific term you want to use for that?
Distinct, living, whole human being.
Zygote? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I was, in layman's terms, calling the fertilized egg,
Yeah.
right? And that happens.
Yeah, that was a misnomer.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, the zygote, you are treating as a
Yes.
full-fledged person
Yes.
from that moment on.
Yes.
Now, except you're treating it as more than a full-fledged person.
No, I'm not, Nadine.
No, let me tell you why, Scott, or ask you why. Is there any other situation where you would say that one person has to donate her body, her physical organs, her health to sustain another person? For example, in our legal system now, a parent cannot be forced even to make an organ donation, even if it's necessary to save a living, fully born human child.
Right.
Do you disagree with that?
Nadine,
Would you want to change that
Nadine,
too?
if you as a parent want to withhold using your resources, your body, to save your own child's life, you're right. The law will protect you doing that. However, you do not have a right to slit your child's throat in the name of withholding support. Abortion is much more than merely withholding support. It's intentionally killing an innocent human being through dismemberment, poisoning, burning. My friend Frank Beckwith puts it real well. He says calling abortion merely the withholding of support is kind of like suffocating someone with a pillow and calling it the withdrawing of oxygen. I mean, there's a whole lot more going on here than merely withholding support.
So you're describing
If I could just jump in for just a moment, I want to give Scott an opportunity to ask the question of Nadine as well.
I don't mind being grilled. I mean, it's...
He's getting to say a lot. Yeah, I'll just ask one more question, and that is, Scott, since you're describing it as such a brutal murder, shouldn't the woman be subject to criminal prosecution according to your values?
There's nothing wrong with a law that says there should be consequences for intentionally killing an innocent human being. But as to what those consequences will be will depend on whether there's been a meeting of the minds. And in order to prove co-conspiracy, you're going to have to show that the mother's understanding of the Abortion Act matched that of the doctor. And that clearly is not the case in most cases. In fact, I have with me up here today somewhere, that's in my bag, I'll find it later, Abortion Practice by Warren Hearn, where he describes the process of turning the ultrasound machine away from the woman during the abortion procedure so she doesn't see what's happening. He talks about hooking up a Doppler for fetal heartbeat to make sure that the fetus is killed in abortion, but don't let the mother hear this. That is definitely a difference in knowledge in many, many cases. And that is why the courts have traditionally worked with women and not prosecuted them, because it needs the woman to be a witness against the doctor. But even if I were inconsistent, Nadine, tonight's debate is about whether this is morally right to have an abortion. Even if I were inconsistent, it doesn't prove my arguments are wrong.
I'm not trying to say that you're inconsistent. I'm trying to, in fact, I think you're actually spelling out the logical consequences of your position, which is what I wanted to hear. Would you say that
Well, what's wrong with a law that says you can't intentionally kill innocent human
Would you
beings?
say that a doctor should be subject to criminal prosecution for performing abortions?
Sure, if the evidence is there, he should be convicted, absolutely.
I mean, well, you're saying the evidence means intentionally destroying a zygote.
Well, first of all, let's be clear. Abortions don't happen at the zygotic stage. They happen at 6 weeks post-conception, because if you do them earlier than that, it's surgically risky for the mother. So we're not talking about zygotes here. We're talking about early fetuses that are destroyed through abortion.
Well, how about emergency contraception that works at a very early stage? Is that something you're morally opposed to? And
I'm not opposed to any birth control that does not take the life of a developing human being once it's begun, and the debate over emergency contraception, the jury is still out on it. I think there's at least plausible evidence it could be abortifacient. Now, this is where some of my pro-life friends in the audience, I'm going to earn their rage right now. I may need you to defend me. But here's what I'm going to say. The evidence that the morning after pill, Plan B, is abortifacient, when you look beyond the labeling to the actual peer-reviewed evidence, is inconclusive. In other words, we don't know for sure if it's abortifacient. It may have a secondary mechanism that in the event of breakthrough ovulation provokes early miscarriage, but we don't know it for sure. So I am willing to say we should err on the side of caution, but I'm not willing to go beyond the evidence and say I know for sure it's an abortion pill. Do I get a few questions here, or do?
Well, you get at least one. I tried to help you earlier.
Just one, okay.
Get about one.
Well, you have to talk a lot. Arguably, that's more valuable.
Well, we want to hear from you too, Nadine.
Thank you.
All right. Nadine, I just want to ask a question that will be seen as a little more on the heart level than just the legal, though it has legal implications. Justice Anthony Kennedy, who you cited in the mystery passage a short time ago, had this to say in his dissent of the Stenberg case. This was the first Supreme Court case dealing with partial birth abortion, the process where...
No, it was the second one. Oh, you're talking
No,
about
Stenberg
Carhart?
was the first.
Oh, right.
Carhart was the second. All right. In Stenberg, though, a discussion came up about dismemberment abortions, the kind that Dr. Warren Hearn teaches in his textbook. And I want to read you what Anthony Kennedy said about the D&E dismemberment abortions. Okay, here's what he said. The fetus in many cases, now keep in mind, Anthony Kennedy is not known as a pro-life stalwart. The fetus in many cases dies just as a human adult or child would. It bleeds to death as it is torn limb from limb. The fetus can be alive at the beginning of the dismemberment process and can survive for a time while its limbs are being torn off. Dr. Leroy Carhart, the abortionist who challenged Nebraska's partial birth ban, has observed fetal heartbeat with extensive parts of the fetus removed and testified that mere dismemberment of a limb does not always cause death because he knows of a physician who removed the arm of a fetus only to have the fetus go on to be born as a living child with one arm. At the conclusion of a D&E abortion, the abortionist is left with a tray full of pieces. I have two questions. First of all, that girl who was born with only one arm because her arm was torn off in the abortion procedure, was she wronged?
First of all, I know nothing. I have no idea whether this is factually true.
I'm quoting
But,
Anthony Kennedy's dissent.
There was a lot in that dissent that I disagree with, and I haven't independently researched it. But I won't fight what I will treat as a hypothetical. If you're talking about...
Well, it's not hypothetical.
If you're
I'm quoting an actual
about
case.
something that is viable, they have a right to be fully delivered. That is exactly what the Supreme Court
Okay, but you're
held
missing
in
the question
Casey
here.
in 1992.
Was that girl wronged? Her arm was torn off in the womb.
Apparently,
So
it sounds like it was beyond
okay, let's
the
say
point
she
of
was
viability.
well, her arm was torn off. Okay.
But according to your standards, Scott, it would still not be wrong unless we talk about the part of the analysis that is always missing from your perspective, and that is what about the pregnant woman? What if this was necessary to save her life?
Okay, in this particular case, we're not talking about it. And by the way, partial birth abortions are not documented to be necessary to save the mother's life. In this case, what we are dealing with is a child in the womb with her arm torn off. She now doesn't have an arm.
Every single medical organization, including the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the Public Health Association, every single one of them filed briefs in support of the medical life-saving necessity of this procedure in certain tragic pregnancies. They occur extremely rarely. These are all wanted pregnancies, and some tragic complication develops late in the process, as a result of which women make a very painful
I've actually got the
decision.
Journal of the American Medical Association brief here on partial birth abortion, and the doctors make it very clear that this procedure is not needed to save the mother's life. And why would it be? It's a 3-day procedure. The woman goes in, has laminaria inserted, you got to wait a day, then they've got to dilate the cervix slowly, then deliver the child breech first, and with only the head left in the birth canal, stab it in the back of the skull and vacuum its brains out. If this were an emergency life-saving procedure, they'd do a quick D&E. They wouldn't use a procedure that takes 3 days, Nadine.
Scott, I don't know where you are getting that so-called
Journal of the
evidence,
American Medical
but let me tell-
Association.
Every single medical organization, all of you, you've got your phones, you look it up. Don't take my word for it.
What they said was they came out in favor of the procedure remaining legal. They did not present evidence it was medically necessary.
Because there are certain cases in which it is medically necessary, and that option should therefore cannot morally and ethically be removed from doctors and women in those tragic situations when it is necessary.
Well, it simply says here that the panel could
Kennedy,
not come up with
by the way,
that.
He
so
also had what is absolutely, indisputably bad science when he said in that same opinion that women are depressed and regret having had abortion.
I haven't argued that
He was
tonight.
going to do us a favor by
Well,
saying, I'm going to protect you poor little women
Justice
who think you
Kennedy
need
quoted
it,
an
and then you live
abortionist.
to regret it.
Well, first of all,
and the scientific and medical evidence is absolutely clear that that is a myth. That
Okay.
most women who have abortions are relieved.
I'm not even
if they're
disputing
sick.
that tonight. I'm not even going there
Just
because
saying,
the morality
his
of abortion doesn't hinge on how women feel about
His representation
it.
of the medical evidence is not credible.
Well, he was quoting an
I'm going
abortionist.
to jump in.
All right,
I'm gonna
do I
jump
get one
in
more
right
question?
there. You can say, well,
Okay.
we don't have time for one more
Well, I only got
question.
one. Do I get one more? Can we add a little on here?
Unfortunately, we can't because
Okay.
we extended time. But what we do want to do is give opportunity for this audience, this wonderful audience, to be able to give, to present their questions. Again, let's give Nadine and Scott a big hand, if we could, for remaining both passionate and respectful with one another. And we ask that your questions would be just that. I'm going to switch seats with Nadine, and I'm going to ask you to begin to line up at either microphone. Now, again, if you're lining up on my left, your right, that means you have a question for Nadine. If you're lining up on my right, your left, that means you have a question for Scott. And so this is going to be a little bit challenging because we want to go back and forth with questions. So please think of ways to reframe your question directed towards Scott. and that way we could be a little
Which
bit
line
fair.
is mine?
That's right. You get this line. You get the shorter line, and it's not a likability contest. With that being said, let me just again give this brief caution. We're asking that you would be succinct in asking your question. This is not a time for you to give a monologue, nor is this time for you to add yourself as the third person to this debate. This is an opportunity for you to ask a brief question. Each debater here will have 2 minutes to respond to your question. They will have 2 minutes to respond to. You have 2 minutes for the question, the person you're asking the question to, and then the other individual will have 1 minute to give a rebuttal question. We will start first here with a question for Professor Strawson. Thank you. You can state your first name.
My name is Sharon, and I'm curious why you did not watch the video that Scott played about abortion.
I've watched it many times. I assume it was the same one I've seen before.
That's a fair response from Nadine. Number one, even if she chose never to watch it, I wouldn't hold that against her. She's not required to watch it. We make video viewing totally optional. And I will vouch for my friend that she is, in the 10 or 12 debates we've done, she has had ample opportunity to see the film. So I wouldn't say that that counts against her position.
And I don't know exactly what Sharon was getting at, but let me say this. The ACLU has consistently defended the right of pro-life advocates to show images like this, and which, as you may or may not know, that right is contested all over the country. People saying, you know, it's shocking, it's horrifying, it's inaccurate, it's various criticisms, and we've always come to the defense of the right to show that kind of imagery.
All right, please state your name. Question for Scott.
Hello, Sheree.
All right, let's try that one more time. You can state your name and your question for Scott.
Hi, my name is Shay, and my question for Scott is, following your ideology, if we were to outlaw abortion, how would we prevent women from doing self-induced abortions? I've read quite a bit of guides since Mr. Trump has been elected, so.
Yeah, fair question, Shay. Is it Sheree or Shay?
Shay.
Shay. All deaths from illegal abortion are a tragedy. We agree on that. But notice the objection assumes the unborn aren't human, because otherwise what we're arguing is that because some people will die attempting to intentionally kill others, the state ought to make it safe and legal for them to do so. But beyond that, we should point out that this doesn't justify abortion. Marianne Warren, who supports abortion, philosophy professor, says murder is wrong regardless of the consequences of prohibiting it. In fact, Dr. Mary Calderon, the medical director of Planned Parenthood during the 1960s, wrote in this article here in the American Journal of Public Health, that the death rate from illegal abortion, including self-induced abortions, was so low it wasn't even worth remarking on. And then she explained why. With the advance of penicillin, post-operative infections plummeted. Women weren't dying from any surgical procedures the way they used to. In fact, the CDC says that 39 women died from illegal abortion in 1972, the year prior to Roe v. Wade, not 10,000 as Barbara Boxer would have us believe. In fact, Bernard Nathanson made the point in his book, Aborting America, Bernard Nathanson being the co-founder of NARAL, National Abortion Rights Action League, that the figure of 10,000 women a year dying from illegal abortion was made up out of thin air. There was no statistical evidence for it whatsoever. And to just give you a modern current example, when the Hyde Amendment was passed in '76 that cut off tax funding for abortion, we were told that women would die in the streets from dangerous illegal abortions. It didn't happen. The claim of 70,000 women a year dying in third world countries, first of all, let's compare like with like. Just because it happens there doesn't mean it would happen here. But beyond that, the claim is totally unsupported. The United Nations Population Division called the claim quite speculative, unquote, and hard data was missing. The World Health Organization, in the very article that cited it, said, we have little info that's available to support the claim. In other words, it's a guesstimate. People are making up these numbers, not you, but people who want to exploit this and claim that thousands of women were dying, when in fact, we don't even know what the populations are in these third world countries, let alone how many women are aborting there.
Nadine, any kind of response?
That the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is an expert on these issues, as well as the World Health Organization, have come out with those numbers. It's true, when abortion is illegal, it's no doubt underreported. But what I think is really powerful is to read the testimony of doctors who began their training before Roe versus Wade, when they saw with their own eyes women in this country, we're not talking about the developing world, in major cities, including Boston and New York, coming in and dying of botched abortions, either self-induced or through unethical, untrained providers. And it's just simply I was going to say inconceivable, but that sounds like a terrible pun. I cannot grasp how it could possibly be consistent with a reverence for life to remit women to what we know they are going to continue to do. The only question is, will it be legal and safe, or will it be illegal and dangerous?
Safe for whom?
Next question for Nadine. If you could please state your name.
Hi, my name is Tina. Thanks for answering my question.
Thank you, Tina.
You mentioned that in Scott's opening statement, he had a crucial missing piece, which was the woman. I'm wondering, how do you justify the fact that a man has absolutely no rights when it comes to protecting his child, as long as his child is in the mother's womb?
I think that it would be absolutely desirable to have the father participate in any discussions, and certainly to share responsibility and planning. Scott probably has the numbers at his fingertips. He does this more often than I do, but I've read the numbers of women who have abortions are vastly disproportionately single, have no man in their life, or if they do, the man is somebody who is abusive, has subjected them to violence. So certainly that type of person should not be entitled to a say. And if there is a tragic situation where there are two fully committed partners in a stable relationship and there is a disagreement, it's clear that the tiebreaker has to go to the person in the pair who is going to bear the most direct, ongoing physical, psychological health consequences, and that would have to be the woman. So interestingly enough, in the Casey case, which in 1992, as both Scott and I have talked about, even though the Supreme Court vastly cut back on the scope of the abortion right and allowed the government to regulate it more intensively at an earlier stage in the pregnancy than in Roe versus Wade, there were 5 abortion regulations that it considered from the state of Pennsylvania, and it upheld all of them, even though all of them had been struck down under the Roe regime, with one exception. And the exception was a Pennsylvania requirement that the father had a veto over whether or not the woman could have an abortion. And the Supreme Court, to the best of my recollection, over one dissent, but with a very strong consensus, said no for the reasons that I gave, that this is something that is uniquely affecting the woman, and therefore the choice has to be with her.
Scott?
Well, if fathers get no say in the abortion decision, I wonder why we force them to pay child support if the mother chooses to give birth to the child. It seems a little unfair here. But gentlemen, do take note. You have no rights. You have zero. You get no say in protecting your own child. That is the current legal reality in America today. And it all comes back to this idea that women have a fundamental, absolute right to bodily autonomy. But here's the problem. Those who argue that the unborn have no say in this, that the mother has primary or absolute bodily autonomy, run into some difficult things to explain. What if, for example, a woman is sick during pregnancy and she wants to take thalidomide to reduce her morning sickness, but we know that thalidomide causes her to give birth to children with no arms and no legs? That's what happened in the 60s. Her doctor tells her don't take it, but she takes it anyway, and then gives birth to a child with no arms. Do we think she did anything wrong? You see, the idea that only the woman can decide this leads to horrendous ethical implications. Not only do dads get off the hook, I mean, I think most men are quite happy to leave it to the woman and avoid responsibility for sexual decisions. I think that just played right into the hands of men. In fact, that's what Bernard Nathanson said. They got together with attorneys who were very, very male-oriented when they were pushing through the abortion laws in the 60s and 70s that liberalized the laws. And they got together with these guys and said, hey, let's make this easier on ourselves. And they were quite happy to work with feminists on this. I think that if the unborn are human beings, and I've argued tonight that they are, they deserve the same protections you and I do, and their dads deserve the right to defend their children just like they do other children.
Question for Scott. Please state your name.
Hi there, Scott. My name is Richard. And of the 58 million that we've lost since Roe versus Wade, approximately 1.2 million a year, 3,000 a day, what would you say would be the percentage that you might that we have lost to rape and incest?
According to Planned Parenthood's own research arm, the Guttmacher Institute, which I have up here with me, less than 1% of abortions a year are done for rape and incest. The overwhelming majority, well over 3/4, according to the Guttmacher report, are done because of socioeconomic reasons, meaning the woman does not wish to be pregnant. Now, to be clear, that doesn't get me off the hook for explaining my moral reasons, which I did to Nadine, as to why we should not intentionally kill innocent human beings, regardless of how they came to be. We shouldn't have the right to intentionally kill innocent human beings simply because they remind us of something painful. However, you are correct. The exact number of abortions done for rape and incest is very, very low. That doesn't minimize the trauma of the individual women who experience it, and I would never do that. But it does tell us that the vast majority of abortions are done for socioeconomic reasons, not for rape and incest, not for life of the mother. And by the way, not only does the Guttmacher Institute say that, so does Dr. Warren Hearn in his book, Abortion Practice, where he makes it very clear that at his clinic, the most high-volume abortion clinic in the world, the overwhelming majority of women are not coming there because of medical necessity. They're coming there because of socioeconomic reasons.
So those that are conceived in rape
I'm going to have to
value?
cut you off. Just one question. Okay. At this point, Nadine has an opportunity to respond.
I'm familiar with those statistics from the Guttmacher Institute, and I think it is really a poor reflection on our society's commitment to help actual full human beings, because 75% of abortion patients are poor or low income. One of their motivations for having abortion is that, not that they don't want the children, but that they cannot afford to care for them, at least at that point in their lives. Interestingly enough, 59% of them already have a child. So they're also concerned about bringing another child into a poor home, adversely affecting their ability to provide a meaningful life, nutrition, and the basic necessities of life for the children that they already have. There's also a correlation with income and the inability to afford contraception. So one of my major points in these discussions with Scott is always, why don't all of us pool our efforts to make sure that there is meaningful access to contraception and contraceptive information for all women, including poor women, that there are meaningful social services and economic support for all women. I don't think that it's an economically coerced choice. To me, is not a free choice. So I do know that there are, of course, many faith groups that are doing what they can, but I think this is something where I would advocate government involvement and government support so that socioeconomic pressures do not persuade women to, in fact, coerce women to have abortions that they would not otherwise choose.
Next question for Nadine. Please state your name.
Good evening. Keith Kainer. You have a wonderfully soft, gentle, feminine voice, so for my old ears, would you mind pulling that microphone even closer so I can hear you?
Oh, sorry about that.
I really want to hear your answer. Leaving aside the lunatic fringe on both sides, that is the church out in Nebraska or Kansas that says God hates certain groups on one hand, and the other group that's talking about harvesting baby farts on the other. What is the essential difference made in 1854 by Chief Justice Roger Taney, himself a slave owner, when he argued for the non-personhood of people of African descent? That was his argument, at least that's my understanding of it. What is the difference between that and the non-personhood argument put forth by the abortionists today? Thank you for answering my question.
Because one has been born and the other is far from birth.
Okay.
That response is question-begging because the very issue is, why does birth matter? In other words, how does a change of location from inside the womb to outside the womb change the essential nature of the unborn? Nadine needs to argue for how that happens, and she hasn't done it. She just asserts it. I could just as easily assert that having a belly button that points out rather than in is what gives us value. And I would be no less arbitrary and ad hoc than she is tonight. You've got to argue why birth matters. But here's another problem for Nadine. At the University of San Francisco Medical Center, Dr. Michael Harrison is doing surgery on fetuses where he repairs herniated diaphragms. And here's how he does it. He removes the child at somewhere between 20 to 24 weeks from the womb, almost all the way out, surgically repairs the herniated diaphragm and places the child back in the womb. If birth is what gives us value, what happens to that child? Does it go from being a non-human to a human briefly and then back to being a non-human again? This is the absurdity of the position we're hearing tonight. Men and women, please get this. If our rights are grounded on things that we don't share equally and that may come and go in the course of our lifetimes, you have no human equality. This is crazy stuff.
Thank you both.
Next question, please state your first name.
My name is also Sharon. So thank you for coming out. My daughter actually dragged me out here. So Scott, I certainly believe, there is great beauty in bringing life to this earth. I do thank you both for coming out here, and you've renewed my faith that I really truly have to go out and support the women's right to choose. So I thank you for that. And my comment, it's more of a comment than a question.
Well, let me stop you because this is a question and answer.
Okay, I'll turn it into a question.
Okay, perfect.
So how is it that you can call an embryo a human life, and you compare it to a 2-year-old who could be resuscitated if a mother did indeed try to suffocate that child with a pillow, for example? So.
Well, first of all, I didn't argue without justification that the embryo was equal to the 2-year-old. I said that's the issue we need to resolve tonight. I compared the two in framing the debate question. I was making the point that we can't simply assume the unborn are not human. We have to argue for it. And to prove that, I said no one would argue that we can kill a 2-year-old in the name of choice and who decides. That only works if we assume the embryo in question is not a human being like the 2-year-old. I never said without argument that the 2-year-old and the embryo were equivalent, though I believe I made the case today that they are. I did make that case eventually, but my purpose in bringing it up early in the debate was to frame the issue that we need to resolve. The debate is not about choice, it's not about privacy, it's not about who loves women and who hates them. It's about one question: what is the unborn? Can we kill the unborn? The answer is yes, if. If what? If the unborn are not human. And tonight I argued from science and philosophy that the unborn are one of us and they differ from us in ways that don't justify killing them. So my comparison early on in the debate was to frame the debate question, and then later I presented my evidence to argue that all human beings, regardless of size, level of development, environment, or degree of dependency, deserve the protection of law.
Well, thank you, Sharon, for that question. I'd like to read a statement from Joyce Arthur. Personhood: is a fetus a human being? Of course, a fetus is much more developed stage. Scott wants to treat even a zygote as a person and as a human being. She writes, the idea that a grown woman's value and status can be equated with or overridden by a cluster of undifferentiated cells the size of the period at the end of this sentence is not only bizarre, it's insulting. I chose not to read that in my opening remarks because I do have great respect for the potential of that undifferentiated mass of cells to become capable of independent, meaningful life at the point of viability. There is no doubt that as you proceed throughout the pregnancy, as the Supreme Court recognized, you become closer and closer to personhood and to a full-fledged human being. But again, I think that early on in the pregnancy, as Scott wants to recognize, it is indeed devaluing the life and the personhood of the pregnant woman.
I want to disappoint a few people here and let you know we're getting close to the end of our Q&A time. I do want to just say, before we take the next question, that Scott and Nadine are willing to stick around for a little bit of time after we're done to interact with you. They both have flights to catch later on tomorrow, so we want to be respectful of their time. But let's go to the next question. If you could just state your first name and question for Nadine.
Absolutely. My name is John. Thank you for being here, Professor Strassen. You mentioned in one of your statements that the text saying that there is a tryout for humanity and that certain embryos are spontaneously aborted. Scott brought up the question and I didn't hear a response from you. I'd like to find out what your thoughts are. How does that prove two things? One, that the embryos in question were not already human, and two, that we may intentionally kill them.
So I think, you know, this debate keeps coming back, right? We agree to this question of at what point does the fact that this entity has the potential to become a full-fledged human being or person, at what point is that entitled to recognition? And we philosophically disagree about that. And we disagree about whether it is a question that is answerable by science. So you're making Scott's argument. I hear the argument, and I just don't accept it for the reasons already stated, not only by me, but to me even more persuasively by doctors and Nobel Prize winners and religious leaders and theologians.
Nobel Prize winners who are not embryologists, and neither is Joyce Arthur, who Nadine just cited a moment ago. In fact, she's not even a philosopher. She doesn't even have a graduate degree. This is an activist in Vancouver, Canada, who refused to debate me a few years ago, and she is not qualified to weigh in on these questions, and I was sort of surprised to hear you cite her, Nadine, on that. Here's the thing, though. Notice what Arthur says. She says, how can you call something the size of a period at the end of a sentence a human being? Notice Arthur didn't give us one shred of argument as to why body size determines value. She just asserts it. That's not an argument, men and women. That's just taking tyranny over small people. Why are large people more human and valuable than small people? That's the principle in play here. Joyce Arthur has no argument for why body size determines value. She thinks she can just make it up. This is exactly what Katha Pollitt does in her book, Pro. It's exactly what we see across the spectrum of people who think that just like we got to discriminate on the basis of skin color and gender at one point, now we can do it based on body size and dependency. I got a better idea. Let's treat all human beings with value and respect.
Thank you.
All right. This is going to have to be our final question for the Q&A session of our evening. Again, I want to say thank you to everyone that's been in line, and they will stick around for a brief time after the debate is concluded. Thank you. If you can state your first name and question for Scott, please.
Hi, Scott. My name is
Can you go to the microphone, please?
My name
Thank
is
you.
Maureen, and I am on this side, but I am a pro-life, and I have stood in front of the abortion clinics for over 15 years, one day a week, sometimes two. And the question I wanted to ask you is, in my firsthand experience of being out in front of the clinics to help women, you talked health, but why didn't you talk about the emotional health when that group of women called Silent No More? Because
Right.
the emotional side of this crops up for years later.
Okay.
Right.
Because at that
Okay,
moment,
I think we got your question. So, Scott, the emotional health
Here's
question.
why. The emotional effects of abortion on women do not in any way weigh in on whether abortion is right or wrong. Abortion would still be wrong even if women felt fine about it. That's why I didn't even engage that question tonight. Now, having said that, you're right. There are women who do indeed suffer consequences. But tonight's debate topic was not about how do people feel about abortion. It was whether it was a moral right or wrong, and therefore I stuck religiously to the moral question. Now, on those same lines, I will point out that Nadine kept bringing up the issue of potential. This is a misnomer. This is a smokescreen. Sexual organs are actual sexual organs, whether they're ever used that way or not. We don't say, oh, they're only potential sex organs. No, they're actual sex organs, whether they fully develop, whether they're ever used that way, it doesn't matter. Unborn humans are actual human beings with great potential. They're not potential persons, they're actual humans with great potential. And that's the case I stuck to. Having said that, I want you to know that the pro-life movement has done a terrific job caring for women. Crisis pregnancy centers now outnumber abortion clinics 2 to 1. I devote a fair amount of my time every year helping these centers raise money to care for women. Nadine said she never heard me talk about the women. Well, because the topic tonight wasn't the women, it was the morality of the act of abortion. But you should know that in practice, I devote a lot of time to helping these centers care for women because I care about the women who go there. And I'm thankful the pro-life movement has risen to the challenge to love and care for not only the children, but the mothers who face these unintended pregnancies.
Nadine?
No comment.
Okay. Well, I want to say thank you to all of you who stood in line to ask questions, and I want to say thanks again to Scott and Nadine for their thoughtful responses. Can we give them both a big, big hand? Can we give them both a big, big hand tonight?
Closing statements?
At this time, we're going to give them the opportunity to present closing remarks for 5 minutes each, starting with Professor Strawson, and then can we move the podium back, please? Is that possible? To move the podium and microphones back. We're going to start with Professor Strawson, and then we're going to go to Scott. As they bring back the podium and set that back up in the center of the stage, let me again say thank you to a few folks right now. Can we give a big hand to Ratio Christi and their leadership for putting on this event? Also, to Students for Life, can we give them a big, big hand as well? And then finally, we want to acknowledge the Wayne State University Dean of Students Office for allowing this event to take place on this beautiful campus. Give them a big, big hand as well. Professor Strawson.
Let me get it closer. This is a mic test. Okay. Well, thank you very much for this wonderful program. Again, to all of the organizers, to all of the audience members, to everybody who asked a question. I didn't mean to be disrespectful to the last question. I wanted to be respectful to the audience because I didn't want to repeat myself. I think there is one major point of disagreement between Scott and me, and we're not going to be able to persuade each other to change our perspectives. And from my view, that is exactly why the Supreme Court got it right when it said this has to be decided according to the personal, moral, and religious values of individual women in consultation with their own consciences and their own religious advisors and doctors. I absolutely respect Scott's views, as my questions to him made very clear to me. He is completely consistent in carrying out his views. I assume that Scott also does a lot to aid what I would consider to be full-fledged human beings and women and families, and not just those that are in utero. And I respect that very much. If I shared his beliefs, I would be out here arguing exactly the way he does. The next point I'd like to make is I want to cite yet another doctor who was raised as with traditional religious beliefs against abortion, describing why it is that he became radicalized and became morally compelled to perform abortions. His name is Dr. Willie Parker. He's a board certified in obstetrics and gynecology and trained in public health, and he's now very active with Catholics for Choice. He says that he felt that absent from these discussions too often are the voices of the women and families that are affected. The lives of these women and their families are what compelled me to add abortion care to my practice mid-career, when I was no longer able to weigh the life of a pre-viable or lethally flawed viable fetus equally with the life of the women sitting before me. I did not provide abortions for the first 12 years of my career as an obstetrician gynecologist. I grappled with the morality of providing them as I came from a traditional religious background that considered abortion to be wrong. And then he talks about listening to Dr. Martin Luther King telling the story of the Good Samaritan that persuaded him that he had to consider not what was good for him, but was good for the person that he was not helping. And he said, hearing that sermon and that's being reminded of that biblical story radicalized me, leaving me more concerned about the unnecessary peril to women when safe abortion services are not available. The next point that I'd like to make in my rapidly waning time is something that I mentioned earlier, and that is the urgency for coming together where we have common ground. And I want to cite an article written by a friend of mine who's done a lot of studies of evangelical Christians. And she starts this piece by quoting an evangelical pastor, Joel Hunter, who says, "I am decidedly pro-life, but by working together instead of arguing, both sides can get what they want." And he gives many examples, including citing that statistic that both Scott and I cited, that roughly 75% of abortions in America occur when families can't afford a child. So why, and then another evangelical pastor in St. Paul, Minnesota, Greg Boyd, is quoted as saying, "A person could vote for a candidate who is not pro-life, but who will help the economy and the poor, yet this may be the best way to curb the abortion rate." So the other area of common concern, of course, is to make sure that contraception is available and knowledgeably used. Unfortunately, there's an income disparity there as well. Here's a statistic again from the Guttmacher Institute. If the United States had a policy to provide affordable and effective contraception, we would radically reduce the number of unintended pregnancies, unintended children, and abortions. The number of abortions per year in the United States would drop from 1 million to approximately 75,000. So I think I'm going to end with a quote from this religious group that I told you about, 2,400 diverse religious leaders. In closing, in this letter they wrote, and I'm going to say, hear, hear. We call for increased dialogue and respectful listening with those who disagree with us. With them, we share the vision of a world where all children are loved and wanted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Strawson. Now we give 5 minutes for closing remarks to Scott.
Thank you, Nadine. Good to see you again. It's been way too long since we tangled up like this. I want to review my case tonight. It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong. I defended that syllogism with science showing the unborn are distinct, living, whole human beings, and I argued from philosophy there's no essential difference that would justify killing you in the womb, but not now. I think I made that case tonight. I think I defended it well with science, with peer-reviewed evidence, and with good reasoning. Nadine's primary response to my case was the issue of viability, that the fetus is not valuable, has no rights until it's viable. She didn't say why that's decisive, she asserted it, but let's do a little thought experiment. Viability does not measure the value of the fetus, it measures our technology. A fetus is viable at 22 weeks at a state-of-the-art New York City hospital, but not viable until 38 weeks in Bangladesh. So let's do a little thought experiment. A woman who is pregnant at 24 weeks gets on a plane at JFK. She flies to Bangladesh, where viability is 38 weeks. And then she flies home. So what happens to her child? Does it go from being a person in New York, where it could be born, viable, to a non-person when it leaves US airspace, back to being a person again when it flies home? This is crazy and leads to terrible inequality. She mentioned contraception. It could end abortion, could help end it, but it's not a slam dunk. In fact, the Guttmacher Institute surveyed 10,000 women to see what their contraceptive practices were, and every one of these women had had abortions. And it asked them, why did what happened here? Less than 10% complained that they couldn't get access to birth control. The birth control was readily available. You know what the problem was? They didn't use it. They didn't want to use it in the heat of the moment, or they used it improperly. But access wasn't the issue. In fact, so much so that William Salatan in the New York Times, a guy who supports abortion, wrote, "This isn't an absence of condoms or pills. This is an absence of personal responsibility." And so tonight, I want to end with this question. What is your obligation? When you are confronted with an argument that is well argued, well supported, and goes against your own view, what is your intellectual obligation? And I'm going to say your obligation is to change your mind. I don't believe that abortion debates don't change people's minds. Yes, they do. Bernard Nathanson was the founder of NARAL, the National Abortion Rights Action League. He became pro-life based on the science of embryology and observing what abortion did to the unborn. So much so that he lamented that he had presided over 60,000 deaths. He changed his mind. We can change our minds. I hope you will change your mind. If you're here tonight and you think Nadine presented the better case, change your mind. If you think I presented the better case, change your mind. By the way, that doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong, because now your beliefs line up with reality better than they did before. That is a sign of strength, not weakness. And so tonight, I ask you, does each and every human being have an equal right to life? Or do only some have it in virtue of some characteristic that may come and go? If any of you would like a summary of the argument I made tonight, I have a copy of the SLED card up here that I will gladly give you. I only have a few copies of my book and our television show, Life is Best, available tonight. I didn't really bring a lot with me. I have a few. I'll sell them if you want them, but I've only got a few, just fair warning. But I want to thank Nadine again, thank Ratio Christi for a great evening, and may God bless you as we go out and pursue the Socratic quest for truth.
What a great night. Can we give a big hand again to Professor Nadine Strawson and Scott Klusendorf? I'd like to personally thank each and every one of you for being out tonight. I hope that you see this as a tremendously valuable investment of time. I also hope that you were challenged by this critical conversation. I believe this discussion merits serious contemplation, because what's at stake is precisely life itself. We must do the hard research in this area. You know, what I appreciate most about Nadine and Scott's presentation is that they reflect deep contemplation and research in the areas of science and philosophy, law, and theology. And I would encourage you to do the same. Do deep study and thinking in these areas of science, philosophy, law, and theology. And I would further encourage you to follow the facts and the truth to whatever logical conclusion that they may lead. This will require that we don't close our hearts or our minds, but we remain open to the truth. If we learned anything from tonight, I hope that it's this, that we should all be lovers of truth. With that being said, again, thank you so much for coming. Let's give another big hand to Ratio Christi, to Students for Life, to the Wayne State University Dean of Students Office. God bless you and have a great night.